In the crimson desert of Arizona, where the wind cuts through the canyons like an ancient whisper, a woman living alone in a small wooden cabin rescued a dying mountain lion cub. She never imagined that months later, the wild would remember her kindness. One quiet dawn, the lions returned to her doorstep, bringing with them a gift so mysterious, so sacred, that it left the entire town speechless, a gift that only nature itself could give. The wind over Sedona had its own kind of voice, low, ancient, filled with stories that no one ever bothered to write down. It carried red dust across the mesas and through the narrow canyons, whispering against the old stones of a cabin that had been built long before Elena Moore was born. She had come here to escape noise. The traffic, the news, the city that never let her breathe. After the accident that crushed her legs and stole her ability to run, silence had become the only thing she could trust. Every morning, before the desert sun rose high enough to burn the dew away, she sat on her porch with a mug of strong black coffee, the kind she used to drink back when deadlines and conference calls ruled her life. The scent of roasted beans mixed with sagebrush and cedar smoke. Beyond the porch, the world spread open like a painted canvas. Red cliffs, pale sky, and shadows of eagles circling above. Somewhere down in the canyon, something moved, quick, low, and silent. Elena lifted her camera, her fingers steady from years of practice. She focused on a shape slipping between the rocks. For a heartbeat, two amber eyes met the lens. Then it was gone. A mountain lion, sleek, lean, and wary. She had read about them in wildlife blogs and travel articles, the kind that use phrases like hidden predators of the American Southwest, or the majestic ghost of the desert. But seeing one this close was different. It wasn't majestic. It was real, alive, watching her back. That night, she couldn't shake the image. Those eyes, cautious but curious, followed her into sleep. When she woke, her heart still pounded as though she had been running. But she hadn't run in years. The accident had made sure of that. On the third morning, she found tracks in the soft dust near her water tank. Large, round, unmistakable. She knelt, pressing her fingers beside one of the prints. Still damp from the night's mist. The lion had come close, closer than it should have. She felt both afraid and honored, as if something sacred had brushed against her ordinary life. Later, at the small grocery in town, she told the cashier, a Navajo woman named May, what she had seen. May's smile faded. "They remember," she said quietly. "When you feed a hungry mountain lion, it won't forget your face. Be careful what kind of bond you start." The warning stayed with Elena. But that evening, when she looked out across the land and saw a storm rolling in, she thought of the lion's thin body, the ribs pressing against its golden hide. The winter had been harsh. Rabbits were scarce, and deer had moved north weeks early. She opened her freezer, took out a small piece of venison left from last season's hunt, and set it on a flat stone near the edge of her property. She told herself it was for the coyotes, but deep down, she knew who it was really for. The next morning, the meat was gone. The stone was licked clean, and beside it lay a single track, fresh, perfect, like a signature. Elena smiled despite herself. It wasn't logical. It wasn't scientific. It was something else. Over the next few days, she began to notice signs that the lion was coming back. The birds fell silent earlier than usual. The jackrabbits disappeared before sunset. Sometimes, while she sat reading articles on her laptop about wildlife conservation or online insurance ads promising protection for what truly matters, she would glance at the window and feel those same eyes watching from beyond the glass. She started leaving bits of food a little farther out each night, never too close to the porch, always near the canyon rim. It wasn't about feeding. It was about trust. And maybe about forgiveness for all the harm humans had done to creatures like this one. One night, the moon rose full and white above the cliffs, painting the desert silver. Elena sat with her coffee, listening to the wind hum through the rocks. The silence felt alive. Then faintly, a sound cut through it, a soft scrape, like claws on wood. She turned her head. On the far edge of the porch, the shadows shifted. Two eyes glowed back at her, gold and steady. Her breath caught. She didn't move. The mountain lion stood there, tall, lean, and wild, its breath steaming in the cold air. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, it lowered its head and sniffed the step where she had spilled coffee the day before. The scent of roasted beans, the warmth of the mug, it lingered. Elena whispered, "You're hungry, aren't you?" The lion didn't flinch. It looked at her one last time, then turned and disappeared into the dark. Only the sound of its paws on dry leaves remained. When she finally dared to breathe again, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not pity, but connection. A quiet acknowledgement between two broken survivors of the same wilderness. That night, before she went to bed, she left another small piece of meat at the edge of the porch, just in case. The wind rose again before dawn, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the promise of something she couldn't yet name. Out beyond the ridge, the mountain lion watched her cabin from the shadows, the glow of her porch light flickering like a heartbeat against the canyon walls. Tomorrow, something would change. She could feel it. The desert was holding its breath. The days that followed passed in a strange rhythm. Every morning, Elena checked the patch of red dirt by her porch where she'd left food. Every night, it vanished without a sound. No tracks, no growls, no broken twigs. Just the faint scent of wild musk lingering on the cold air. She started keeping her camera by the door, lens focused on the canyon rim. It wasn't fear that made her watch. It was curiosity, the quiet kind that keeps you awake at night wondering what else is out there. One morning, as the sun rose like a slow flame over the cliffs, she caught sight of movement near the ridge. Through the telephoto lens, she saw the lion again, this time in full daylight. Its coat shimmered bronze under the desert light, ribs faintly visible beneath the fur. But what caught her breath wasn't its hunger. It was the limp. The back leg dragged slightly, healed wrong from an old wound. She whispered to herself, "You poor thing." And the words hung in the still air, vanishing as soon as they left her lips. That evening, Elena drove into town to buy supplies, extra batteries, canned food, and a sack of raw venison from a butcher who supplied hunters. When she returned, she found a truck parked near her drive. A tall man leaned against the hood, wearing a tan ranger uniform and mirrored sunglasses. "Evening," he said. "Name's Wyatt, county ranger." Elena's heart skipped. "Did I do something wrong?" He gestured toward the ridge. "We got reports of a lion roaming close to homes. Just want to make sure folks know not to encourage it. They start losing fear of people. Someone ends up calling animal control." Elena folded her arms. "I'm not encouraging anything. It just passes through." Wyatt studied her for a long moment. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job 15 years. I can tell when an animal's being fed. If it's coming back, it's not by accident." He wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. But his words hit her like cold wind. He handed her a flyer, Mountain Lion Safety Guidelines. with links to state wildlife insurance programs and a number for emergencies printed in bold. "Keep your distance," he said. "That cat may look graceful, but it's still a predator." After he left, Elena stood in the fading light, watching the clouds shift over the desert. She knew he was right. Yet when the wind carried that same faint scent again, dry sage and musk, she felt something deeper than reason. The wild didn't ask for permission to survive. That night, the storm clouds returned. Lightning flashed in the distance, turning the mesas into silhouettes. Elena left a small cut of meat farther from the porch near the edge of the property. As she placed it down, she caught a glimpse of the lion standing on a boulder across the canyon, watching her. For the first time, it didn't run. It simply stood there, tail flicking slowly, eyes glowing amber against the storm. The next morning, she replayed the footage from her camera trap. The lion had come closer than ever, its shoulders brushing against the lens for a split second before moving on. But something else caught her eye. In one frame, right beside the mother, was a smaller shape. Rounder face, shorter tail, a cub. Her breath caught. She paused the video, leaning forward until the screen filled her vision. The cub looked weak, its steps uneven, as though one paw couldn't bear weight. Then lightning flashed in the background, freezing both figures in a single haunting image. Mother and child framed by thunder and dust. Elena sat back, shaken. "You have a baby," she whispered. The realization turned fear into awe. That explained the lion's cautious behavior, the way it lingered near the food but never came closer. It wasn't just hunting, it was protecting. Over the next week, she left less food, trying not to interfere. She read articles online about wildlife conservation, about how human contact could alter natural instincts. Every headline warned the same thing: don't cross the line. But every evening, as the sun bled across the desert and the sky turned the color of rust, she felt the pull to the ridge. Sometimes she imagined she saw them there, the mother and her cub, silhouettes against the horizon. Other nights, she heard faint cries, high and sharp, drifting down with the wind. The sound twisted her heart. One afternoon, Wyatt returned. "Still seeing her?" he asked, scanning the cliffs with his binoculars. "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "She's got a cub." His expression hardened. "Then it's even more dangerous. You need to stop putting food out. If she starts depending on people, both of them could be put down." Elena turned away. "You talk like they're criminals." "I talk like someone who's seen what happens when wild things forget they're wild," he said quietly. After he drove off, Elena stood alone on the porch, the wind tugging at her hair. She looked toward the ridge and thought she saw movement again. But this time the light was strange. Flickering. A reflection. She lifted her binoculars and froze. The lion was there, crouched low, muscles tight. Beside her, hidden in the brush, was the cub, its fur slick with rain. The mother turned her head toward the cabin, eyes locking with Elena's. Between them, for the briefest second, stretched a fragile bridge of understanding. Then a crack of thunder tore through the air, and both shapes vanished into the storm. Elena stood there long after they were gone, the sky breaking open above her. She couldn't tell if the ache in her chest was fear or something that felt dangerously close to love. When she finally went inside, she left the door unlocked and the porch light burning. She told herself it was habit. But deep down, she knew she was waiting. For the eyes on the ridge to come closer. For the silence to speak again. Outside, rain began to fall in. Slow, heavy drops. Somewhere beyond the canyon, A lioness lifted her head toward the wind and listened. By late February, the desert sky had turned strange. Too dark for the season, the air too heavy to breathe. Elena could feel the storm before it came. The horizon wore a bruise of deep purple, and the wind carried the metallic scent of rain mixed with dust. The old radio in her cabin crackled with warnings. Flash floods, power outages, road closures. But she barely listened. Her thoughts were on the ridge, where the mountain lion had last appeared. All afternoon, thunder rolled like distant drums. The light shifted from gold to gray. Birds vanished. Even the coyotes went silent. When the first drops hit her windows, fat and cold, Elena stood on the porch and watched the canyon disappear behind a veil of rain. She thought of the cub, the way its small body had wobbled behind its mother, and whispered a prayer to no one in particular. By midnight, the storm had become a living thing. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, rattling picture frames. The roof moaned. Power lines flickered, then went black. Elena lit a kerosene lamp and moved through the cabin carefully, checking windows, listening. Outside, the sky flashed white, then split open with thunder so violent it shook the floor. She heard something then, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a cry, short, desperate, almost human. She froze, the lamp trembling in her hand. There it was again, a thin, sharp wail carried by the wind. It was coming from the canyon. Her heart pounded. She opened the door. Rain slashed sideways, soaking her instantly. The flashlight cut through the dark in narrow arcs, revealing only swirling mud and the blurred outline of her porch steps. She called out, "Hello?" The only answer was the echo of her voice and the wind's hollow reply. For a long time, she stood there, torn between reason and instinct. Then, shivering, she closed the door and waited. Hours passed. The storm raged on, and exhaustion finally pulled her into uneasy sleep. When she woke, the world was silent. Too silent. The storm had moved east, leaving the air raw and clean. Patches of fog clung to the rocks like ghosts. She stepped outside, boots sinking into mud, and saw what the rain had left behind. Fallen branches, flooded trails, small landslides cutting through the dirt road. Then, near the water tank, something caught her eye. Tracks, fresh, deep, and scattered. They didn't move in the clean, straight line she had come to recognize. They zigzagged, overlapped, circled back, signs of panic. A few feet away, smaller prints followed, then stopped. She knelt beside them. The earth was stained dark where water had mixed with blood. The sight made her throat tighten. She followed the trail, her limp still slowing her, but not stopping her, until she reached the porch steps. There, under the edge of the overhang, lay a small, trembling form. A cub. It was barely breathing. Mud clung to its fur, one leg twisted unnaturally. Its eyes fluttered open, pale green, unfocused, and met hers for a fraction of a second before closing again. Elena's mind went blank. She didn't think about rules or ranger warnings or wildlife laws. She only saw a dying child. She crouched down, whispering softly, "It's okay, baby. It's okay." Then she heard it, a low, rolling growl from beyond the clearing. Her head snapped up. At the far edge of the canyon stood the mother. The same golden coat, slick with rain, her body tense but unmoving. Those eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes, locked onto Elena. Lightning flickered across the sky, and for a split second, they saw each other clearly. The lioness didn't attack. She didn't flee. She simply stood there, chest rising and falling, tail twitching once. And in that single moment, Elena understood. The animal wasn't there to threaten her. It was there to beg. Something primal passed between them. Something older than fear, older than language. A silent plea. Help. Elena swallowed hard. "I'll take care of it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise." Slowly, she reached for a blanket from the porch chair. The lioness made a low sound, half warning, half sorrow, but didn't move closer. Elena knelt, wrapping the cub gently, feeling the faint thump of its heart against her palm. The air smelled of wet fur and earth. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The injured cub in her arms, the mother watching from the ridge, the storm's remnants still echoing through the valley. Then the lioness took one step back, as if giving permission. Elena carried the cub inside, closing the door softly behind her. Her hands shook as she searched for her phone. No signal. She grabbed the emergency satellite device she'd bought months ago, something she'd ignored until now, and sent an SOS message to the Flagstaff Wildlife Rescue Center. Minutes later, a voice came through the static. "This is Dr. Arya Yazi. What's your emergency?" Elena explained everything. The storm, the tracks, the cub, the mother. There was a long silence. Then Dr. Arya said quietly, "If the mother brought the cub that close to you, she must be desperate. But you need to act fast. Wrap the leg to stop movement. Keep it warm. Do not feed it. We'll prepare a team, but the roads may still be blocked." Elena did as told, her breath coming fast. As she worked, the cub whimpered weakly, pressing against her hands. Outside, she thought she heard another sound, soft claws pacing in the mud, a shadow passing near the window. The mother hadn't left. 3 hours later, headlights cut through the fog. 2 rescuers stepped out, mud-splattered and exhausted. They examined the cub, murmured quick medical terms, then placed it into a transport crate. Elena stood by helplessly as they carried it to the truck. The lioness's tracks surrounded the area like circles of worry. Before the doors closed, Elena whispered, "Please tell me it'll make it." One rescuer looked up. "It's got a chance," he said, "if it survives the night." When the truck pulled away, the sound of tires fading into the distance, Elena realized her porch light was still on. She turned toward the ridge. There, just beyond the mist, stood the mother lion, watching. The light reflected in her eyes like tiny suns. She didn't move, didn't growl, just stood, silent as the mountains. Elena's voice cracked. "I'll bring your baby back." The lioness tilted her head slightly, then turned and disappeared into the canyon. Rain began again, soft this time, almost gentle. Elena stayed there until her hair clung to her face and her hands went numb. Inside, the house smelled of damp earth and fur, a mix of fear and hope. Later, as she sat by the fire, she looked at the empty porch and felt the truth settle deep inside her bones. The line between wild and human wasn't as wide as people believed. Sometimes it was only the width of a promise. And somewhere out there, in the dripping silence of the desert, a mother lion waited for that promise to be kept. The drive to Flagstaff was the longest 3 hours of Elena's life. The storm had left the roads carved with mud and broken tree limbs. Every curve felt like a question she couldn't answer. Would the cub still be breathing when she arrived? Would the mother forgive her for taking it away? Her fingers clutched the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. In the passenger seat, the small carrier sat strapped in place, a towel wrapped around the cub's frail body. It barely moved, its breaths shallow and quick. The heater roared, but the air still felt cold. She talked to it the whole way, her voice trembling. "You hold on, little one. Your mama trusted me. I'm not going to let you down." Lightning flashed in the distance. illuminating the slick highway and the dark outline of the mountains. When she finally reached the Flagstaff Wildlife Rescue Center, dawn was just beginning to touch the sky. Two figures in medical scrubs rushed out as soon as she pulled up. One of them was Dr. Arya Yazi, the calm voice she'd heard through the static. Her long dark hair was tied back, and her expression was steady but kind. "Bring it inside," Arya said quickly. They moved fast, transferring the cub to a small exam table under bright lights. The smell of antiseptic and wet fur filled the air. Elena stood nearby, her clothes still damp, her heart hammering. Dr. Arya's gloved hands moved gently, checking the cub's pulse, eyes, and limbs. "It's a compound fracture," she murmured. "Bad one. And he's severely dehydrated." "He?" Elena asked, clinging to the word like it mattered. Arya nodded. "A young male, maybe 5 months old. He's strong for what he's been through. That's a good sign." The veterinarian injected a mild sedative, then began cleaning the wound. The other staff prepared a cast and IV fluids. Elena watched every motion, barely breathing. It wasn't her child, but it felt like one. The quiet hum of the machines reminded her of hospitals and nights spent praying for someone she couldn't save. After what felt like hours, Arya stepped back, pulling off her gloves. "He'll live," she said softly. "But recovery won't be easy. The leg will heal crooked, and he'll never run like a wild cat should." Elena felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. She looked through the small window where snow still fell outside, melting on the glass. "I promised his mother I'd bring him back." Arya's eyes softened. "I know. But sometimes keeping a promise means changing what it looks like." They let her sit beside the cub's enclosure that night. The tiny body lay curled under a heat lamp, chest rising and falling. Every time it shifted, she flinched. She hadn't prayed in years, not since the accident, but now her lips moved soundlessly. Please, let him make it. When she finally stepped outside, the sky had cleared. Stars blazed over the pine trees, sharp and endless. The wind blew cold against her face, carrying with it the faint scent of sage. Somewhere far away, she thought she heard the distant echo of a lion's call, rolling through the canyons like grief itself. Over the next few days, she returned to the center daily, ignoring her physical pain and the long drive. The staff began calling her the Lion Lady. She brought coffee, blankets, and silence. Sometimes she talked to Arya about the cub's progress. Sometimes she just sat and listened to the soft rhythm of breathing in the recovery wing. On the 5th day, Arya found her sitting by the glass window, watching the cub twitch in his sleep. "You know," the vet said, "he's starting to recognize your scent. He calms down when you're near." Elena smiled faintly. "That's not good, is it?" "Not if we want him wild again," Arya replied. "But it might be what's keeping him alive right now." The thought stayed with Elena long after she left that evening. On the way home, she stopped at a gas station for coffee. A small ad played on the radio, something about life insurance for families. Protecting what you love most. She almost laughed. Protection seemed like a fantasy in a world where a storm could steal everything overnight. When she reached her cabin, the night was calm. The power was still out, but the moonlight painted everything silver. She stepped onto the porch, listening. No sound, no movement, just the whisper of the wind against the canyon walls. Then, faintly, she saw it. 2 glowing eyes in the distance. Her breath caught. The mother lion was there, standing on the ridge where Elena had first seen her months ago. The animal's silhouette was framed by the stars, unmoving, waiting. Elena whispered into the wind. "He's alive. He's safe." Her voice cracked. "I swear I'll bring him home." The lioness tilted her head, tail sweeping the air once, then turned and melted back into the darkness. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She dreamed of the canyon again, the sound of rushing water, the flash of eyes in the storm, the feeling of fur against her hands. When she woke, dawn was breaking over Sedona. The light poured through the window, touching the empty blanket she'd used to carry the cub. The cabin felt too quiet, too hollow. But on the porch, the wind carried something new. The scent of rain, dust, and the faint trace of wild musk. The mother had returned during the night. Near the edge of the clearing lay a single feather, dropped from a hawk, clean and perfect as a message. Elena knelt, touching it gently. "You're still out there," she whispered. "You're waiting for me to keep my word." The promise she'd made was no longer just about a cub. It was about faith. Faith that compassion could cross the border between wild and human, between instinct and mercy. And as the wind swept across the ridge, carrying her words toward the mountains, she knew there was no turning back. The wild had asked her for help, and she had answered. Now, she belonged to it too. By late March, the snow was gone, leaving the red earth of Arizona glowing beneath a new spring sun. Elena drove the winding road to the Flagstaff Wildlife Rescue Center every few days, her old truck coated in dust and faith. The cub, now officially named Orin, was recovering faster than anyone expected. His cast had been replaced with a smaller brace, and the wound had begun to fade into a thin scar under his golden fur. But his leg would never be the same. "He'll walk," said Dr. Arya one morning. "But he won't run. Not like the wild demands." Elena pressed her hand against the glass of Orin's enclosure. He tilted his head at her voice, the green eyes bright, curious, almost affectionate. "He's still just a child," she said. Arya nodded. "And children remember kindness longer than pain." Outside, the air smelled of pine sap and warm rock. Elena walked to her truck, the doctor's words echoing in her mind. When she started the engine, the radio filled with ads between static, voices promising home insurance with real protection, investment plans that keep your family safe. She shut it off. Nothing could ensure what she had promised to protect. At home, her cabin looked smaller than she remembered. The silence pressed in like a second skin. On the porch table lay the hawk feather she had found weeks before. She touched it absently, thinking of the lioness who still haunted the ridge. That night, she dreamed of them both. The mother pacing the canyon, the cub limping in circles, unable to catch up. She woke to the sound of wind scraping against the roof, and for a moment she thought it was claws. The next morning, she drove to town to meet Ranger Wyatt at the local diner. He had been calling for days, worried about reports of mountain lions closer to the main road. When he saw her, he tipped his hat. "Heard your cub's doing better," he said. "He's not mine," she replied softly. "Maybe not legally," he said, stirring his coffee, "but the wild doesn't care much for paperwork." Wyatt warned her that local ranchers were getting nervous. A lion had been spotted near livestock pens, and if it attacked, the state could authorize a hunt. Elena's heart dropped. "It's the mother," she whispered. "Could be," he said, "if she's desperate enough." He looked at her carefully. "You still plan to bring that cub back?" Elena didn't answer. She already knew the truth. The cub had imprinted, too accustomed to human voices, too calm around the scent of people. Returning him might mean death for both of them. Later that week, Arya called her into the office. The cub was ready to leave intensive care. "You have two choices," the vet said. "We can transfer him to a sanctuary in Colorado, or you can apply to keep him under our home rehabilitation program. You'd need training, certification, inspections. It's a lot to take on." Elena hesitated only a second. "I'll do it." What followed was a blur of paperwork, safety plans, and sleepless nights. She took online wildlife management courses, built enclosures from scratch with the help of a few locals, and spent every spare hour preparing the land. The site she chose was a flat patch at the edge of her property, facing the ridge, the same place where she'd first seen the lion's eyes. The structure rose slowly from the ground. Steel mesh that caught the sunlight, sturdy gates, a man-made pond fed by spring water, and boulders hauled from the canyon to give Oren shade. She called it the Haven. When Wyatt came by to inspect it, he shook his head, half impressed, half worried. "You realize," he said, "this is the only lion enclosure for 50 miles? She smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's where the wild and human world can meet halfway." By May, everything was ready. Aria arrived with a transport crate in the back of her truck. Oren was restless inside, pushing against the door. Elena's stomach fluttered with fear and hope as they carried him to the enclosure. "Open it slowly," Aria said. Elena knelt beside the crate and unlatched the lock. The door swung open with a soft creak. For a few moments, Oren didn't move. Then, with surprising grace, he stepped into the sunlight. His paws touched the red earth, tail flicking, nose lifted to the air, heavy with the scent of mesquite and sage. Elena stayed silent, watching as he explored, testing his injured leg, sniffing rocks, splashing a paw into the shallow pond. His movements were clumsy but proud. He looked back at her once, then turned toward the ridge, eyes narrowing. Dr. Aria whispered, "He knows." That evening, when the doctor had left and the sun dipped low, Elena sat outside the enclosure as the desert cooled. The horizon burned orange, fading into the indigo of night. From somewhere beyond the ridge came a sound she hadn't heard in weeks, a long, low call that echoed through the canyon. Oren froze, ears twitching. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and answered. A smaller, broken growl, but clear enough to pierce the silence. Elena's breath caught. The mother was near. She scanned the darkness until she saw her, a pale shape at the far edge of the clearing, eyes glowing faintly in the dusk. The lioness didn't come closer. She stood still, tail moving in slow rhythm, watching her child. Tears filled Elena's eyes. She whispered, "He's home, in his way." The lioness tilted her head, and in that moment, something passed between them again. Recognition, gratitude, or maybe something older. Something beyond words. Then, with a soft sound that was neither growl nor sigh, the lioness turned and slipped back into the canyon. Elena stayed outside long after dark, listening to the night's steady rhythm, the hum of crickets, the distant bark of coyotes, the quiet breathing of the cub in his new home. She thought about all the lines she had crossed and how none of them mattered anymore. Later, inside the cabin, she wrote in her journal, "The wild never really leaves you. It waits for you to understand what belonging truly means." As she set down her pen, she caught her reflection in the window. Tired, older, but alive in a way she hadn't been for years. Outside, Oren stretched beneath the stars, a golden shape beneath the wire fence that shimmered like liquid silver under the moon. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the mother watched, unseen but not gone, her presence woven into the wind that carried across the desert, gentle, eternal, and full of promise. The desert woke before the sun did. A faint blush of light crept across the cliffs, soft as breath, painting the red stones gold. Elena sat by the window, coffee steaming in her hands, listening to the quiet hum of the morning. It had been 3 months since Oren came home, and the world around her had changed in ways she couldn't explain. The air felt calmer, the nights less lonely. Every sound, the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the power lines, seemed to belong to a rhythm she finally understood. She had learned the patterns of her new companion's life. Oren slept through the hottest hours, stretched under the shade of a juniper tree, and prowled at dusk when the air cooled and the desert turned silver. He was growing stronger, heavier, the muscles filling out around the leg that would never fully heal. Some days, when he walked with barely a limp, Elena caught herself believing he might still make it back to the wild one day. But deep down, she knew the truth. His place was here, halfway between freedom and care. Each evening, she'd check the motion cameras she'd set along the property line. Sometimes they caught coyotes, deer, or dust storms sweeping through. But more often, there was a single image she kept replaying. The mother lion, still alive, still near, always watching from the edge of the ridge. Elena wondered if the lioness knew Oren was safe. She wanted to believe so. One morning, she woke before dawn to a strange sound, a scraping noise, heavy but careful, coming from outside her door. Her heart thudded as she pulled on her robe and stepped to the window. The porch light was still on, bathing the ground in a pale circle of gold. Something was there. She opened the door slowly, her breath fogging in the chill. At first, she saw only the shadows and the shape of something lying still in the dust. Then her eyes adjusted, and she realized what it was. A young deer, clean, unbroken, lay gently at her doorstep. Its eyes were closed, its body untouched, as if it had been carried there and placed with care. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. The scent in the air, wild musk, earth, and cedar, was unmistakable. She turned her gaze toward the ridge. In the faint blue light, she saw her, the mother lion, standing tall against the breaking sky. For a long moment, neither moved. The lioness stood proud and still, the early sun glinting off her coat like fire on bronze. Her head dipped once, slow and deliberate, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with understanding. It wasn't a hunt. It wasn't a threat. It was a gift of trust. Elena whispered, voice breaking, "Thank you." The lioness blinked once, then turned and vanished into the desert, her powerful body melting into the light like smoke. Behind Elena, a soft sound came from the enclosure. Oren had woken, sensing something. He padded to the fence, golden eyes reflecting the same dawn that burned over the canyon. He made a low sound, half growl, half purr, and lifted his face toward the ridge. Elena walked to him, resting her hand on the warm metal of the fence. "She came," she murmured. "She still remembers." Oren blinked, his gaze steady on the horizon. In that moment, he looked older, more wild, as if some part of the desert still lived in him, untouched by walls or fences. The sound he made then was soft but deep, the kind of sound that belongs to both memory and instinct. The sun broke free from the mountains, flooding everything in gold. Elena stood in its light, tears sliding down her cheeks. The deer on the porch gleamed like an offering under heaven's fire. She thought of everything that had happened, the storm, the rescue, the nights of fear, and realized that this, here, was the end of the story she'd been writing without words. She buried the deer near the edge of the property, where the sage grew thick and fragrant. above the grave, she set a flat stone and laid the hawk feather across it. When the wind rose, the feather trembled, then settled as if at peace. Later, she sat on the porch with her coffee, the same way she had the morning she first saw the lion's eyes. The desert stretched endless before her. In the distance, the ridge shimmered with heat and light. And somewhere beyond it, she knew the lioness was still watching, still guarding the boundary between wildness and grace. A truck rumbled up the dirt road then, breaking the stillness. It was Ranger Wyatt. He stepped out, removing his hat. "Heard a strange report this morning," he said. "Someone saw a big cat heading east at sunrise, said she looked healthy." Elena smiled faintly. She was just here. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "You've done something special, you know. Most people call us to get rid of things they don't understand. You found a way to live with it." She looked out at the ridge again. "She found a way to live with me." Wyatt chuckled softly. "Guess that's the same thing." After he left, Elena stayed outside, watching the sun climb higher. The land shimmered in heat, the red earth glowing like embers. She thought of all the lessons nature had taught her. The patience of survival, the cost of compassion, the strange balance between love and distance. Inside, the radio played a soft commercial about home insurance and financial protection for what truly matters most. The words floated through the room like ghosts of another world. She turned the dial down, smiling. Out on the porch, Oren stretched lazily in his enclosure, his coat shining under the desert sun. He glanced toward the ridge once more, then lay down, eyes half closed, the picture of peace. Elena opened her journal, the same one she had filled with notes since the storm. On a blank page she wrote, "Sometimes the wild gives back. Not in words, not in ways we can keep, but in trust. That's the real gift." She closed the notebook, her hand lingering on the cover. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of sage and rain through the open door. It rustled the curtains, stirred the air, and for a heartbeat, she thought she heard it again. The faint call of a lion far away, fading into the vastness of the desert. The promise had been kept. And in the golden quiet of the morning, Elena finally understood that some gifts are too sacred to ever be repaid. They can only be honored.